Hi, this is Sarah Strong. This presentation has been created to show my action research study for my course through Lesley University. My topic is effective strategies for teaching mathematical word problem solving to ELL students. My research question specifically is what are effective strategies for teaching ELL students math word problem solving skills? The reason I chose this topic is I teach a math intervention class with primarily ELL students, and I've seen my students have difficulty with math word problem solving. They have difficulty understanding the language in the problems, and they also don't appear to have many strategies for working on challenging problems. Also, I found that the achievement gap between non-ELLs and ELLs on state testing measurements of math that typically include quite a bit of word problem solving, that gap increases from grade 4 to grade 8. So this is definitely relevant to middle school students. The three strategies that I've investigated are basic strategy instruction, bar model drawing, and schematic instruction, including culturally and linguistically responsive teaching practices. So to identify those strategies, I was informed by the literature. Some other important topics from the literature, I think this could be assumed: the greater the linguistic complexity of a word problem, the greater the achievement gap between ELLs and non-ELLs. Also, in state testing measurements, word problems that include schematic diagrams, which are diagrams representing the concepts of the problem or relationships between numbers of the problem, not direct pictures from the problem, that when that type of diagram is included with a problem, even if the problem is linguistically complex, ELL students perform better. Also, research has shown that basic strategy instruction has helped ELL students improve math word problem solving. So this includes teaching students to understand and attend to a problem, teaching them to create a plan, and then carry out their plan with calculations. One strategy that's helped students with mathematics difficulty improve word problem solving is bar model drawing, which is sometimes called tape diagrams. They're pretty similar. And this has helped students improve accuracy in word problem solving. Also, research targeting ELL students has shown that schematic instruction, which teaches students to identify a problem type, such as a type of problem that is going to incorporate addition, or a type of problem including ratios and proportions. So teaching students to identify the problem type and using culturally and linguistically responsive teaching practices, like allowing students to use their native language, encouraging students to share their background and relate background to learning, and incorporating student interest in content, that has shown to help ELL students improve word problem solving. So what did I study and how? So I followed the action research process, and what I appreciated about this process was identifying a topic relevant to my classroom, my teaching, and my students. And so I realized that my students were struggling with this, and I wanted to improve my teaching practices for helping them. And so I looked at what others had done, and I developed a better context for the topics of math and language in general, and then created a plan to follow. And what I appreciate about action research is it encourages reflexivity while performing research and adapting to situations that occur because we teach in dynamic environments. The participants in my study are all ELL students. In my math intervention class, it's primarily ELL students, but the ones used for data collection in this study are all ELL students. 7 students were included in the study because I obtained permission from their parents to participate. All students have performed below the 20th percentile in district math assessments from the year prior, and so their teachers have identified them as students who would perhaps benefit from a math intervention class as well as their math core class. The students included in my study, 4 of the students are LEP, which means Limited English Proficient students, and 3 of the students are FEP, which means Fluent English Proficient students. The LEP students have not yet passed our state language acquisition test, which is the WIDA, and the FEP students have passed this test. LEP students, for the most part, they are typically pretty conversationally fluent and socially fluent, but I find that they are challenged with academic language and academic vocabulary knowledge that shows up in their reading and writing. And so they haven't quite passed the test yet. And FEP students, they have passed the test, but they're being monitored for 2 years to ensure that language acquisition is not a major hurdle to their academic progress. Also, the student participants include 6 boys and 1 girl, and all of the students are Latino ELL students from Spanish-speaking families. To collect data, I tried to include various perspectives from different participants in the action research process. To begin, I gave students a pretest on their ability to solve word problems. I focused on ratios and proportions throughout the entire study. And then after each intervention was targeted, students took a post-test, so they took 3 post-tests. As well, during the process, I included observations while teaching, and then I included reflections and field notes in a handwritten journal. That was usually done after the teaching session, and I transferred my observations during class to the field notes journal as well. Also, I collaborated with the 7th grade math teacher. He was a critical friend in this action research process. He also did an observation during the second intervention strategy, and I included his notes. And lastly, I gave students a survey after the last post-test as part of my data collection. So as I mentioned, I gave the pretest, and then we focused on the basic strategy instruction. For this process, I used the acronym RISE, and we made a note-taking sheet like this, going through the steps of solving a word problem. I encouraged students to read a problem at least 2 times, and while they did that, to circle and underline important information. Students were asked to make an illustration, and in this case, it was really a diagram to make a chart based on the information in the word problem. And students were asked when they solved the problem to always check their answers using tools available for the entire research process. They were allowed to use calculators or multiplication charts to eliminate computation errors. And lastly, students were asked to write a sentence including their answer as an explanation of their problem solving. Here's some student work sample from this process, so showing the different steps that we took while following RISE to solve word problems. So this included 3 days of instruction, 2 43-minute periods, and 1 80-minute period based on our schedule. And then on the 4th day, a 43-minute period, students were given a post-test. After the first strategy, we focused on bar model drawing. And once again, we started out with a note-taking guide like this. These are examples of what bar model drawing, sometimes called tape diagramming, looks like when using it to solve word problems. And then we spent 2 days working on problems together, some guided instruction and some partner practice while I roved around the classroom. And here's some examples of students using bar models to solve word problems. Then students were given a post-test, and then we moved on to schematic instruction with culturally and linguistically responsive teaching practices. I felt in my reflections like my students were a bit tired of the word problem solving process, just going one by one in guided and partner practice. And so for this intervention, I used stations as our format and included hands-on practice and interest-based activities. So for example, many of my students are into soccer, and so we did a problem involving ratios and proportions, including 2 famous soccer players. Also, for this strategy, we spent 1 class period discussing and talking about the language in math word problems and different words that indicate different problem types that can help you decide what type of problem the word problem is and create a plan for solving it. And then students were given the student survey after the 3rd post-test. And here it was a brief survey, 2 closed response questions. and one open response question. So looking at my data, I looked at student work samples from the pre-test and the post-test, and I looked at whether the student solved the problem correctly, whether they used the targeted strategy, whether computation errors inhibited their accuracy, and whether they used relevant information from a problem or if they were distracted by extra information. So this graph shows what the students did. And so you can see that from the pre-test to the third post-test, the third intervention, that students increased their accuracy quite a bit. However, as I'll mention in my data analysis, I don't necessarily think the third strategy was the most effective. I think overall their exposure to word problem solving and problems with ratios and proportions may have improved their overall ability, but I do think each strategy, students showed improvement, so each strategy has potential of being effective in the classroom. I also looked at my field notes and observations. I coded them into categories such as student engagement and language issues that related to the language of the problems that came up during practice or during the post-tests. And then I took those notes and I put them into each strategy category in my analysis. And then I looked at the student surveys and I made this chart to show the first question was whether students felt like they improved, and then which strategy was the most effective. And the third question was an open response question. And so I included data from that survey. So what my data reveals is, as I mentioned, it's difficult to determine exactly which strategy was the most effective. However, if you look at each student, for example, the reason you don't see the blue post-test is because these students had an accuracy of 0% on the pre-test. And so each student improved their ability to correctly solve word problems quite a bit during the process. And so instead of targeting which strategy was effective, I think all of the strategies could be useful in teaching ELL's problem-solving skills. From the student survey, I realized that students preferred the RISE strategy and the BAR model strategy. And overall, students felt like they had improved in their ability to solve ratio and proportion word problems. This is a word splash created from the student survey, the open-ended question, and something that really stood out during the process was students just attended to the questions a lot better than they did before starting the action research. So things like underlining and circling important information, that stood out in student responses as something gained during this process. And in my teacher notes, I really felt like the students were the most engaged and interested in learning during the third intervention strategy. So from this, I find that all three strategies may benefit ELL students and their ability to solve word problems. I'm going to share my basic strategy instruction using the RISE acronym with the math team, the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers, because I think it could benefit all students and particularly ELLs. I'm going to share the bar model drawing strategy with the intervention team. I think this strategy, what I found is it really works for some students, and including numerous diagram techniques could be something beneficial to a math intervention class. And then lastly, the schematic instruction with culturally and linguistically responsive teaching practices. The way I plan on sharing this with my staff is, as an ELL teacher, sometimes I help teachers plan a unit through co-teaching or co-planning. And so trying to incorporate student interest and some attention to academic and mathematical language through a project or through some routines in an upcoming unit, I think that could be a way to incorporate what I gained from the third intervention strategy and share it with my colleagues. So overall, the action research process was very interesting and informative, and I plan on using it in future teaching endeavors as I come across problems or questions that I'd like to improve on.